Good evening, my name is Jonathan Moxley. This evening I'll be presenting to you my persuasive speech. The audience is geared towards the school system, students of all ages, school staff and audience, parents and guardians. Pressure society can cause some students to reach a point of no return mentally, causing them to make a decision that will forever impact the life of the student and those surrounding them. Active shooter scenarios are an unfortunate event that continues to happen. There has to be better preventative measures in place to minimize the loss of life and neutralize the threat. The active shooter scenarios that I aim to address are geared toward preventative measures to react in a more effective and proactive way that minimizes the loss of life and contains the threat. I also aim to establish programs that alert staff when an active shooter shows signs of isolation that may lead to a seductive shooter scenario, and establish quarterly training in the event there is an active shooter in the building. To inform the audience about active shooter deterrence or reaction, and to persuade them that enable quarterly active shooter training exercises and having veterans or other security contractors present as a response force. There have been more than 215 students that have experienced gun violence at schools since the Columbine shooting. The Post have found that at least 141 children, educators, and other people have been killed in assaults, and another 287 have been injured. In 2018 alone, there have already been 17 shootings, the highest number during any year since at least 1999. Source: John Woodrow Cox. This number can be minimized if preventive measures are put in place. Whether you see your child off to school, at a child's graduation, or attending a school play, the last thing a parent wants to worry about is another student taking the life of their child because another student felt there was no other way out. As an experienced professional, I have trained staff members at 3 local child development centers on how to barricade, evacuate, or at least or as a last resort, fight their attacker in the event of an active shooter scenario. Allowing vetted personnel to protect the lives of students, faculty, enact preventative active shooters, semi-quarter training, installing security measures such as locks, barricades in classrooms to keep the active shooter contained in a specific area. Allowing schools to fund or volunteering outlets to provide physical armed security for the school system, educating staff on proper procedures to minimize the loss of life, and finally, researching and implementing the necessary equipment to help thwart a possible active shooter scenario in a school. Let's take a closer look at this important topic. Allowing schools the funding or volunteering outlet to provide physical armed security for the school system could be a deterrence to an active shooter scenario. Deter the shooter from entering the building. If he still enters, slow the ability to move easily around the school and hinder his ability to find his targets. Without armed response on site, precious extra minutes must be bought until law enforcement officers arrive. Perhaps most importantly, every attempted mass shooting that fails in itself is a deterrent for future killers. Source: Noble. Possible shooters are more likely to attack easy targets such as gun-free zones that are typically heavily populated. Having armed personnel on the property can be a large deterrent for any would-be attacker. Security measures are often classified along the 5 steps of security continuum. Deter, detect, delay, respond, and recover. In an active shooter situation, if we wait until the response step, typically when law enforcement arrives to a 911 call, there will likely already be a loss of life. Source: Lawrence J. Fitzgerald. Passing laws to create jobs or increase budgets would allow schools the ability to either contract with local law enforcement agencies or a security contractor, just as the companies Google and YouTube already use, to protect their faculty, staff, and students. This brings me to my second point. Educating the staff on proper procedures to minimize loss of life so they do not place themselves at risk to the responding officers or the suspect. Some of these procedures include semi-quarterly active shooter training, barricading locks in the classroom. We are the only company in the world that offers a program and model like this for schools and workplaces. The full-scale active threat response program for schools in an in-depth 6-month program revolutionizes how administrators, staff, and students respond to, plan for a active threat on campus. Source: Guardian Defense. Creating safe areas can be used as panic rooms, ensure staff members know the closest evacuation routes, and having a primary and secondary plan are all essential pieces that must be met in order for the best possible outcome to be met in an active shooter situation. This brings me to my third and final point. Researching and implementing the necessary equipment to help thwart a possible active shooter scenario in school. Some of these include cameras, audio surveillance, and metal detectors. In a school security system, the ideal goal should be to convince kids not to even attempt to do anything that is unacceptable. Addressing an incident after it occurs is good, but not as good as it never have happened. Once the perpetrator is caught, there is a chain of events involving confrontation, denial, parental involvement, consequences, and perhaps even the involvement of law enforcement and the legal system. Source: U.S. Department of Justice. With camera surveillance used in school in conjunction with the possibility of a live feed option, this could allow responding officers to have eyes on the building without ever stepping foot through the doors, to locate suspects and approach the targets as tactically and quickly as possible. Video feed in conjunction with metal detectors, deadbolts, and a fail-safe on doors could pose quite the obstacle for the would-be shooter. This brings me to my conclusion. The Bible states, Proverbs 2:11, "Discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you." When staff and students are educated in protecting themselves and there are officers, surveillance and metal detectors as a deterrence, this can be enough to put an end to active shooter situations in school. School is meant to be a safe place to learn and grow, not a place to be fearful of. Call of action. Educating staff and students and having preventative measures could be the key to preventing and stopping loss of life due to active shooter situations. Lastly, the key to our success on stopping school shootings is not banning guns, taking away our Second Amendment rights as U.S. citizens, but establishing procedures to make our schools impenetrable to unauthorized weapons. If guns were banned, stabbings, chemicals, bombs, and cars would be used instead. The only difference would be that you as a citizen would no longer have the right to own a firearm to protect yourself. Perhaps it is time technology become more integrated with our firearms, such as biometric technology, which would limit a weapon from being used by an unauthorized individual. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time.